Next thing I want to do is I want to put this head on. I have a new gasket. And they say to torque it to 220 inch-pounds. All right, we're going to put these push rods in, and then we're going to set the valve lash. So we need to be on the top dead center of the compression stroke, and both of these valves are supposed to be set to 4 to 6 thousandths. So I'm going to do 5. I just set those so it's just grabbing. And then I'll tighten it up. This always takes me a couple tries. For this valve cover, we have a new gasket. I was going to buy a new spark plug. I haven't yet. I just put it in there, the old one in there, just to hold it. Now, something attaches to this here, and I forget what it was, but we'll figure it out when we get there. They go on the bottom. And then there was just 2 regular bolts on top. I couldn't find a torque for these. I also need to buy a new breather hose. This piece here was bent up quite bad. I tried to straighten it a little bit on the vise. So that might have to be something to come back to. That I remember this piece covered up that. I'm going to raise you up here just a sec. Alright, so that went on. Cover that. Again, it's a little bit bent. And then this piece on there. I forgot to turn that. So that little lever on the inside of the engine has to be turned clockwise. That'll have to be adjusted later. This here is the oil sensing module, and this here is the oil sensor that we saw on the inside of the engine. Plug that in. And the next thing we'll do is get this flywheel on. I call these a Woodruff key, but I know that's not what this is technically called. I think the Woodruff key looked like a half moon. We have this plastic fan that goes on. It's still in good shape. Yeah, it is in the book here. Flywheel fan. 140 inch-pounds. So let's get that going. And this goes on here. That should work good if I can get a torque on it. That'll work. Grab my trusty book again. I think that's about 100 foot-pounds. 120 foot-pounds. Okay, I'll try to find my socket for that and get my bigger torque wrench so I can get more leverage on it. I have this set at 120 foot-pounds. I backed this off because I seem to be putting a lot more torque on that than I ever remember doing. So the book is saying 120 foot-pounds, but there's been so many discrepancies in that book that I tend to not trust it. And I just went and looked at some other resources online and I saw 100 foot-pounds. So I'm going to dial this into 100 foot-pounds and then I'm going to do some more research and see if I can figure out what it's supposed to be. But 120 seems like an awful lot of force. I missed a wire that's supposed to go on that bolt, and then that attaches to the start and stop button. Yeah, you can see where it was sitting right there. I found that red wire in the bag that I had the ignition coil in. That's what we need to put on first. And it actually has text on the side saying this side out, and this side here says cylinder side, so you don't mess it up. So that's going to go right on like that, right there. Do we want to talk about this ignition coil? So that's part of the ignition system, and I call it a ignition coil. Some people call it a magneto. That's what my father used to call it. It's called a magneto because it uses this fixed magnet on the flywheel to generate a current. This thing has an iron core and it has a winding of copper wire wrapped around it, and that's called a primary coil. And then around that it has another winding of copper wire, and that's the secondary. And the secondary coil has many more turns of wire and they're much smaller than the primary coil. And then there's a tiny, usually you can see them, I don't see it on this one, but there's another smaller coil that gets things going called the trigger coil. So this sits on here like so. When this magnet flies by this coil, when the engine's running, we have billions of electrons moving around from atom to atom in the copper wire, and it pushes the electrons in one direction, which is your electrical current. And it sends this electrical current up to the primary coil. Remember from our first video, when electrical current passes through a conductor, it becomes an electromagnet, and that magnetic field is felt by the secondary coil. And when the magnet goes by, then that magnetic field collapses, and it's so fast over the more windings in the secondary coil compared to the primary that it creates a charge that went from a few hundred volts to a few thousand volts. So it acts like a transformer stepping up the voltage. Now, that electrical current needs to find ground. Remember, the negative electrons, they want to find something positive or more positive than themselves. So they flow out of this HT wire to the spark plug. When they get to the end of this spark plug, they create a spark right there. And how that happens is the electrons get to the end of this electrode and they have no further place to go. The pressure, which we call voltage, causes these electrons to repel the electrons in that little gap that we have. That's why it's so important to have that set properly. Once these electrons in the air gap are repelled, then atoms in the air molecules now need electrons, and that is called ionizing the air. When the electrons fill that gap, we see this as a spark, and they travel into this ground electrode into the engine. Again, this flywheel comes around. The entire process repeats itself. Every time this flywheel comes around, one revolution, the magnet comes around and induces an electrical current into the primary. That creates a magnetic field, and when it collapses, that voltage is transformed to the secondary coil. It sends current up the spark plug where it gets to the end, and it jumps that gap, which creates a spark, and that ignites the fuel and the air that's brought in by the carburetor into the combustion chamber, and bang, we have our power stroke. You always read in the literature or watch videos that we need spark, timing, fuel, and compression, and that's how your engine runs. Now the gap between this coil and the flywheel is supposed to be between 8 and 12 thousandths. The magnet sucked it right in. And it just so happens that a business card is about 10 thousandths, so it's what's commonly used. Let's suck it in and tighten it up. A lot of the weight's in that power head, but Things starting to get up there again now. And this goes to 180 inch-pounds. Sure, this thing isn't dirty, but I'm going to take a quick look inside, run it through the ultrasonic cleaner. Well, there's a little bit of varnish in the bottom. Yeah, it needs a good cleaning. Now the throttle's stuck on it as well. Moves a little bit. Choke's okay. I think the tip's okay on that, so we should be good. Carburetor came really clean. I didn't bother knocking out that main jet. It looks to be perfectly clear. Carburetor looks good. I don't have a new gasket. Put one on order. So I'm just going to put this together like this, and then if it leaks, I'll replace it. We're getting down here to the final few parts of the engine, and might take me a few tries to get everything back in order. That cord went through there and through that black grommet. spring goes in there. Those These bolts that hold the pull cord assembly on are 70 inch-pounds. These two carb bolts are also 70 inch-pounds. I ordered a new breather hose and it should be in tomorrow night. And they're supposed to be at 40 inch-pounds. There was some kind of piece of plastic over that I'll have to find as well. I'm quickly running out of nuts and bolts, so I probably will have to take a few of these back off once I find out that I put them in the wrong spot. So the red one went on the bottom, and then the black. And the white. A new air filter come in. Where I put that in. I ordered my new breather tube. Next thing we want to do is put this engine on the chassis, and we'll take it outside and fire it up. All right, we're going to give her a try here. Give it full choke. We got a temporary gas line set up. All right, that's running way too fast. I have the manual for it, and it's supposed to run at 3600. Usually when I have a half an hour or an hour, I might come out and do a little bit of work. And when I put that carburetor on, I obviously forgot to adjust this governor setup. So this is a mechanical governor, and inside the engine is a mechanical gear, and it spins, and it has those little flyweights. I think I was showing when I had it all apart. And so with centrifugal force, the little flyweights open up and it pushes a pin out against this governor shaft. Inside the engine we have the governor gear. This governor shaft has to be rotated so it is pressing up against that little governor gear at all times. If it's not up against it, the engine will run away and there's nothing holding it back. So it's quite simple to adjust these, and it's right in this manual. I'll just read it here. Here's idle position right here, and it says on the book, rotate the throttle linkage from idle position to wide open throttle. Note the direction of the rotation of the governor arm. So you can see that governor arm is turning in a clockwise rotation, and then it says while holding the linkage wide open, use an appropriate tool to rotate the governor shaft in the same direction. We want to turn it clockwise until it makes contact on the inside. Now it's smoking a little bit, but I'm expecting that because of all the assembly lube inside the engine, but that should only last a few minutes. I'll run the engine for about 5 minutes, and then I'm going to change the oil. Smoke is cleared up after a few minutes. I'm just going to let it run out of gas, and then we'll take it back inside and we'll hook the rest of the generator parts up. Get this bell housing put on. A little thread locker on it. These are to be set at a torque of 20 foot-pounds. Now, in order to torque this rotor, we're going to have the engine locked up, and rather than try to disassemble half the engine, I'm just going to put the piston on bottom dead center. And then we'll use this method here where we fill the cylinder with rope, and then when we start to twist on the rotor bolt, the engine will lock up. This is a tried and true method, so it can't turn. This is supposed to be between 20 and 23 foot-pounds, and I've seen people break them, so I'm just going to start out at 20 and see how that feels. That's 20 right there. We'll go 21. There, that's close to 21. I'm going to call that good. Next, we're going to put on the stator. I'm going to get a rubber mallet and just pound that in a little bit to try to close that gap. I'll throw these nuts on these little feet here. I don't have a torque spec for them. And we have this little ground wire. One of the things that it says in the manual is when you have the rotor and the stator off, you should slowly pull it over and make sure you don't hear any binding. That's perfect. So we'll put these brushes back on, and remember that this blue wire was the positive wire, and the positive wire on these generators usually goes closest to this rotor bearing. So we'll put that outside, and the red wire goes on the inside. Remember, I had a hard time getting that off. I hope I don't have to take it off again. This is only plastic, so I'm just going to do them finger tight. I hesitate to put this piece of plastic on here because its job is to take warm air from the engine and funnel it over to the carburetor so the carburetor doesn't freeze up. And we're heading into summer now. But I put it on and take note of it. Hard for me to show, but there was one nut down there on the side and a couple right here. Now the last piece is the gas tank, and I don't know where the gas tank is. I think it's down in my shed, so I'll go look for that. And the final piece of the puzzle is the gas tank. And we'll get this fuel hose back on. We're back on this CRAFTSMAN generator. It's been 1 or 2 months since I last tested it. We've been away to horse shows and just not around. And I forget where I left it off. I know when I first started it, it ran too fast. We adjusted the governor and I brought it back out. It was looking good. When I put it back together, I noticed it was going to be really hard to adjust the engine speed with the gas tank on. So I took the gas tank back off, and I have a couple fans here. I think I can get up to about 3,000 watts. So we'll fire it up and we'll give it a little test. Well, that test didn't go as planned. When I let it run for 10 minutes, it was just smoking like a bugger. So there's something wrong inside. We'll have to tear it apart again. We can't give up. That's not an option. So maybe the third time's the charm. I'll clip the video here and load it up, and we'll have to make a 4th video on what I find out. It could be something as easy as, I don't know, I might have a ring upside down. I know I spaced them apart 120 degrees. That might be it. We might have a valve seal stem bad on the intake, or the cylinder might be bad. I measured it with the tools I had and it looked like it was in spec, but we'll tear it apart and we'll keep on trucking until we get an answer. You don't want to go home? You want to continue your walk? All right.